Hey everybody, good to see you all. So excited to have Aslynn here to talk to us today about a topic that's really important to many of us. If I can use the analogy, we're like a lot of holographic puzzle pieces, and I know we've had misdiagnoses, we've had multiple diagnoses. Some of us are still exploring what parts of us can fall under different rubrics. So this will be an extremely interesting talk. I think it's been the consensus that we don't want a long list of rules. So I'll just say if you can keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, that'd be great because people have auditory processing challenges. If you can raise your hand in the screen or using the icon for your turn to talk, that would be terrific. And if you want to use the chat as a means of communication, just put read at the front end of what you're writing so that we know you'd like to share that with everyone, and one of us will read that out loud to the group. And so now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Aslynn.
I'm Aslynn Romano. I am autistic. I have ADHD. I'm a mom, and I have some neurodivergent kiddos. And working as a psychiatric nurse practitioner and in psychiatry for about 9 years now, my understanding of what it means to be autistic from when I was a kid until now has rapidly changed. And I think it continues to rapidly change with this time that we're in. I have been thinking recently that we're all kind of unearthing what it means to be autistic in real time right now. And so, full transparency, I wrote the description for today before I wrote what I was going to talk about today. So the plan now is that I'd like to just kind of tell my story, my diagnosis journey, and really just kind of focus on my experience in my own diagnosis journey and a little bit about what it's been like to be a diagnostician in the very literal meaning that I do perform diagnostics. But I am really, truly only the utmost expert in my own lived experience. In any area of science that I could speak on, there are people who are far more knowledgeable and educated and experienced. And I think that we're all in these many thousands of pockets of people that are coming to new ideas and new understanding all the time. And so it's my hope that among this conversation, I can learn some new ideas and then maybe share some of my perspectives as well. I do want to give a content warning. A significant part of my story and part of my mission in talking about these things contains the topic of suicide. I can't really tell my story without talking about suicide. And so if that is a troublesome topic, you may want to consider whether or not you want to continue in this talk. And it's not a large subject, but it does come up. And that is because autistic folks, depending on demographics, compounding risk factors, we are at somewhere between a 3 and 28 times more likelihood to die by suicide. And so I think it's important that that be discussed, and it's a huge part of why I do what I do. So I'm really excited to get your feedback, and so I want to see what resonates with everyone and have a conversation at the end. So I have about 30-ish minutes. We'll see how fast I talk of kind of story, and then I'm hoping we can all kind of talk together at the end. If you have questions or need me to repeat something, please feel free to put it in chat. I do have chat up. I'm not gonna promise that I'll catch every question or address everything, but I will do my best to keep an eye on it and here we go. My story starts as early as I can remember feeling a little different. One summer when I was 7, there was this girl I was playing with, and her name was Jessica. And we were outside, and it was summer, and we were playing in the sprinkler. And I had a Jonathan Taylor Thomas bowl cut at the time. For the 90s folks who remember that the mushroom haircut was a fashion statement for sure. And I was wearing a green and black one-piece bathing suit. I was assigned female at birth. And Jessica asked me if I was a girl or a boy, and I was very confused. I told her that I was a girl, and I said because obviously I was wearing a girl bathing suit. And I realize now that I repeated to Jessica what I was taught about myself, but when I said it, it didn't really feel right in my body. And that was the first time that I felt so different in a way that I didn't really understand. I was in the gifted and talented program in my elementary school, and it was called the Key program. And all I remember about that is that we would be pulled out of class, similar to the kids who needed occupational or physical therapy. They'd put us in the computer lab, and we did what was essentially trivia for hours. They called it the quiz bowl, and we would compete with each other and with other groups. And there's a joke that I read somewhere that made me think about how gifted and talented programs are essentially designed to keep all of the neurodivergent students busy and to stop us from bothering the teacher with incessant questions and interruptions and chattiness. And I think that there's some truth to that. It was a long fall from this level of what was considered high academic performance to barely graduating high school. I was a kid who thrived on performance-based praise, and it took a serious toll on my mental health. I had very few friends growing up and significant difficulty maintaining relationships when I did manage to make friends. I was among one of the first generations to grow up with a computer in my room and the internet. And so that's where I've lived the vast majority of my social life, is online. I spent countless hours chatting with friends, playing games, writing stories, and making art. I also took thousands of those personality tests that were available all over the internet. What gargoyle are you from the Disney's Gargoyle like anthology down to not credible IQ tests, any test I could find that I could take that was multiple choice that would tell me a little bit about who I was. I wanted to take it. I wanted to find out who I am. Who am I really? And then high school freshman year, I missed 45 days of school due to what we thought were migraines. I became light and sound sensitive. My head hurt, and all I wanted to was to be in bed alone in the dark. My mother brought me to the doctor because I was starting to get in trouble with attendance in school, and I was medically cleared after an MRI. I now look back on this and I think that they must have believed that I was clinically depressed. I was given my first psychiatric medication, which was an SSRI. It did not help. The hallways were so busy. The lights were so bright. I forgot things in my locker constantly. I had no idea how long it would take me to cross the building, so I was either the first one in class and called a total nerd, or I was late and I was in trouble. My locker was a mess, my book bag was worse, and I had always gotten excellent grades before. But my senior year, I really had to hustle to pass to graduate. I failed a gym class because I always forgot my sneakers and the gym clothes that I was supposed to wear, my locker combination. Sometimes what I needed to be wearing for gym was right there. And because of dyscalculia, I couldn't remember my combo. And I failed the class because of these things. I tuck myself into a shower stall to change because I didn't want to change in front of people. And I didn't really understand why, other than being bullied for being heavier than other kids. All of this impacted my grades substantially and pretty much destroyed my chance of scholarships or grants for college. I intentionally applied to out-of-state schools because I wanted to escape. I wanted to start over. And what I found when I got there was completely overwhelming. During orientation, I got very sick. Frankly, I got mono despite not having any relationships with anybody. And I slept all day and night. And one day when I was trying to come back from the bathroom, my roommate locked me out so that she could become more familiar with another classmate. I had to sleep in the doorway. I had no friends that would help me, and the RA kind of laughed, thought I was drunk, and walked away. I was not comfortable leaving my room after that because I was afraid I'd be locked out again, and I was not ready to go out and face crowds of peers. It did get easier. I made some friends that would come to be very formative for my identity. I encountered new music, new comedy, new ways to exist in relationships. And it was the first time that I really felt like I was desirable company. But in my first semester, I started to fail classes. I was a music education major and discovered very early in that I didn't want to teach. I just wanted to sing thick harmonies like in high school choir because that was among the happiest that I've been. I knew that I could lead a choir and I needed a career, and so it just made sense. My keyboarding teacher accused me of not studying because even though I had started teaching myself the piano at age 4, I couldn't relearn the basics. My muscle memory had been solidified and I just could not imitate the movements that were put forth in front of me. She accused me of not studying. She treated me as if I was being obstinate. And I couldn't make my fingers move the way I was told should be natural. I had the same problem trying to learn choreography. I loved musical theater because it was an opportunity to be with a group and sing in thick harmony and tell a story. I considered myself a better singer than an actor, but it was an opportunity to engage with Broadway musicals, which brought me a lot of joy and comfort growing up. I would be told that I should want to step with my left or right foot. And I was treated with a lot of frustration when my natural inclination was the opposite of what they expected. I could not retain the multi-step directions, and I felt increasingly self-conscious. I still have difficulty engaging my body in this kind of movement or dance to this day. The shame was intense. In brass methods, where they taught us the different horns, I couldn't make a trumpet or a French horn play a single note. I became so overwhelmed by the constant socialization, high pressure to perform, an overwhelming financial burden that I was accumulating that I stopped attending class. I had been fueled my whole life by performance-based praise, and I was failing. I just stopped going anywhere. I stopped going to the dining hall. My friends brought me food. I stopped showering, and my hygiene declined. I stopped leaving my room. I just stopped. And this was my first episode of complete shutdown. I ultimately dropped out of that school and moved home, and it broke my heart. I did eventually return to college, but I would drop out 3 more times before I was able to make it all the way to my first graduation. During my second attempt at college, I was attending a polysomnography program, which are the sleep studies that people do to see if they have sleep apnea. And I started attending therapy because I was so depressed. And my therapist asked me why I couldn't make friends in my new classes. And I said that I had trouble relating with them. I went to a community college in a disadvantaged part of the state, and Everyone was either a second and career student or an English as a second language learner. This is not meant to be any sort of statement about those folks. I just came from a place where I just didn't relate. I was honest with my therapist and said that I thought that I might be at a different level as some of my classmates, and that I became frustrated when classmates asked repetitive questions, that I often felt annoyed and bored in class. She told me that that seemed rather snobby, and that was the first time that a mental health professional did me harm. I continued to flounder academically and socially, but professionally, I made great strides. Without a degree, I was able to leverage family connections and managed to climb a couple of corporate ladders. I ended up in a six-figure job, and I was very privileged to be able to use my systems thinking, attention for detail, and knack for process improvement, and got rapidly promoted. And I heard somewhere the phrase promoted to a place of incompetence, and that is exactly what happened to me. They put me in charge of people, and I was not good at that. I'd like to think that I'd be better at it now. We are 20 years out from that time, a little less, but I'd like to think I'm better at it now. I was terrible at it then. After my strengths helped me whipped our office into operational shape, my leaders expected me to shift into sales and marketing and cold calling on people in their offices. It was miserable trying to go places I had never been, talk to people I had never spoken to, arriving unannounced and knowing they don't want to talk to me. I was interrupting very busy people and had nothing to offer them. I got lost often. I started going home for breaks, and those breaks got longer and longer. One day, my supervisor had to talk to me about an attempt I'd made to coach my team. Now that I was out on the road, they were having trouble keeping the office running smoothly. What I tried to tell them is that I knew they could do it because I can do it. And this was filtered through the perspective of having pretty low self-esteem. Figured if I could do it, anybody could do it if they just knew how. I didn't think I was capable of much. So I felt strongly that they were capable of this. They did not hear the message that I intended to send. When I said, I can do this by myself, they said or heard, I don't need you. My supervisor very reasonably demanded to know why I said this, why I would tell my team that I could do it without them. I insisted I hadn't. I was so confused and so distraught. I didn't want anyone to feel the way I would have felt if someone told me that I wasn't needed at my job. I had very dark thoughts. I was put on a performance plan. I took a demotion. I was given unachievable goals at that new position in an environment surrounded by people who skirted the rules and had been for a long time. The operational mess was too far gone and beyond my ability to repair. And again, performance-based praise. I was miserable. I was lost. I became physically ill and my mental health deteriorated further. I sought psychiatric care for the second time in my life. My new therapist asked if anyone had told me that I talked really fast. I said no, but I didn't really talk to many people outside of work settings. She asked if I held people to excessively high standards, and I said, I don't think so. She asked if I was a perfectionist with myself, and I said, maybe. But she asked me if I thought I was impulsive, and I said no. Retrospectively, what I meant was that I felt that I had good judgment. I didn't understand yet that good judgment and impulsivity are not mutually exclusive. She asked me if I'd read a book, The Unquiet Mind, a memoir by Kay Redfield Jamison. She's a clinical psychologist and bipolar disorder researcher who also identifies herself as bipolar. It's a book that's often recommended for people with a new diagnosis of bipolar disorder. When I read it, I did relate with a lot of what she experienced, but on the other hand, much of it did not make sense to me. There are scenes in the book where she would run around naked in the rain, feeling euphoric. I did not experience this. I'd also never tried to hurt myself. I'd never even really thought about wanting to hurt myself, but a heck of a lot about not wanting to be here anymore. And thinking back to high school, part of that time spent online, I Googled, it wasn't Google then, but I searched for suicide notes because I wanted to know what people wanted to say before they left. And now, as a psych professional looking back, that was an intense red flag that nobody ever saw until maybe the last handful of years when I was able to realize it myself. But I guess enough of the book resonated with me, and this new therapist helped me so much. I connected with her really well, and I felt like she saw me, and she believed I had bipolar disorder. I eventually came to believe her, and I realized that my good judgment saved me from the ill consequences of my significant impulsivity. It did not mean I was not impulsive. It just meant that I was lucky. I began a medication that was referred to as a mood stabilizer. And it was like this thick cloud, this heavy weight lifted off of me. Taking care of myself was suddenly much easier. The endless loop of, I can't do this anymore, was less urgent, and I felt a little better. I had tried countless antidepressants and medications for anxiety and depression before, but I wasn't able to move around the world without the heaviness of clinical depression before this bipolar medication. That medication saved my life and continues to keep me alive, period. Point blank. So, okay, I accepted I had bipolar disorder. I began to be open about it, wanting to ease the stigma and help people who had struggled just like me for so long. It was because of this experience and visiting an inpatient unit once to see a close friend, I decided that I wanted to be a psychiatric nurse. My mother's a nurse, my father's a nurse, my grandmother's a nurse. I had been told for many years I should go back to nursing school. I found a reason. I went. It was a long road to graduation, but because of hybrid classes and being able to be an autonomous adult in an environment where I could accommodate myself, I finally made it through. And I passed my NCLEX, the nursing boards. And I began working on an inpatient unit in one of the leading psychiatric hospitals in the US. I happened to work at Yale New Haven Hospital for 5 years. Admission after admission, I would encounter people with bipolar disorder and various degrees of severe and moderate mental illness. Many of those patients I could relate to, and I leveraged my experience to support my patients. I had had some of these side effects from ineffective medications, and I struggled to get the help that I needed. I was delighted to ease suffering, and I think I can safely say that I was pretty good at that job. After years of supporting and treating individuals with bipolar disorder, I wasn't really sure that this diagnosis is what the DSM would say best explained my symptoms. But it didn't matter. I had what I needed and life was good. Fast forward to 2020 and the COVID pandemic. We're in lockdown, but I'm still working in a hospital and I'm not terribly social. So life isn't very different for me. I have 2 children at this point, under 3 years old. They had us, they had each other, but not really any peers their own age. We socialized with family, cousins, aunts and uncles, and grandparents, but fairly infrequently. We were a bit of a distance away. One day, a family member familiar with early childhood development suggested that my oldest child ought to be evaluated by early intervention services. I was completely shocked. To this day, I have no idea what specifically she saw. It hadn't occurred to me at all that my kid could be delayed or different in some way. I didn't see why, but I am very positive on early intervention. And I understand the value, and assessments theoretically can only bring supports. So we called the organization that was locally and by legislation legally obligated to help us because they were under 3. Spoilers, turns out both my kids are autistic, and it's 2021, and the TikTok explosion of late identified ADHD and autism is going full blast. And my scrolling leads me to believe that I might also be autistic. The evaluators, when they saw my kiddos, pointed out a lot of quote unquote red flags that sounded intimately familiar. I'll never forget that the developmental psychologist was saying that my child got dinged on their evaluation for exhibiting their inherent traits. Her assertion that he was somehow falling short or failing by being his brilliant, unique self. It was the first time I was deeply disappointed by an evaluator of this kind. These symptoms were traits that I shared with my children. Their challenges resembled my own, but I had developed systems and different strategies to cope. And the more I reflected, the more it made sense. The more I read, the more I thought it must be true. And I began looking to get evaluated. I'm a nurse practitioner at this point. I grew up in the system, if you will, under very traditional psychiatry. And I'm sorry, now I understand, but at the time, self-diagnosis was just not an option. I also can't really get behind the phrase self-diagnosis as a very literal person who works in diagnosing people. I tend to use the phrase self-identification because to me, we're talking about identity and not a disorder. So I may use those interchangeably. But to me, as a diagnostician, diagnosing must come from an objective place, and our identity is ours and subjective. But the concept is valid, but I have trouble with the language. I'd been taught that it was irresponsible and even dangerous to self-diagnose. And it also just kind of felt gross to be relating so strong with something that was considered a social media fad by many. And I've heard that sentiment echoed by many of my own clients since that time. However, I could not shake the sense that I'd stumbled upon something deeply personal and revolutionary for my self-image. After months of trying, I could not resolve this feeling on my own, and I needed to call a professional. I got on several waiting lists, and I put down a large deposit with one particular practice. By their branding and organizational information available, it was obvious that they generally provided assessments for autistic children and young adults with ADHD. But they said, sure, we can assess adults too. When I met the psychologist for the first time, she was really impressed by my credentials and my resume. She said, a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Well, then you already know. It would be exceedingly rare for me to diagnose an adult unless they were, and she stumbled over her words. So I offered, unless they're overtly impaired. And she said, yes. And she seemed relieved. And I was like, I should have asked for a refund right there. But I didn't. And much to my surprise, at the time, my experience felt very objective and unbiased. There were lots of pattern finding and memory games and drawing shapes and all of these things where I was able to demonstrate my psyche skills. Intelligence testing, cognitive speed, working memory. It took 4 hours and I was exhausted. I'll always remember at that results appointment, She led with the good news that I'm not autistic. She suggested that perhaps if I'd been evaluated as a child before I gathered all these coping skills, then maybe I would have gotten a diagnosis. But I was simply too good at mitigating my intense distress in order to qualify for a diagnosis. And like, okay, I'll buy that, right? As a psychiatric nurse practitioner, I know the DSM is essentially a book of checklists. And if the evaluator feels that they can check enough of the boxes, congratulations, you have a mental health disorder. I didn't have the words for it then, but I knew that just because I didn't light up the full constellation of required criteria, it didn't mean that my brain wasn't wired that way. It just meant that I wasn't broken enough for this lady to give me the label. It was after that when the psychologist dropped another bomb. You don't have bipolar disorder. That sort of broke my brain. I hadn't considered at all that I wasn't bipolar. I'd come to accept this about myself, and it was part of my identity that I shared with people. I talked about how a mood stabilizer relieved me completely of my depression and how my love of psychiatry was born in this discovery. It was via that diagnostic label that I was connected with something that I needed, that I need in order to survive. How could it be that a misdiagnosis saved my life? She told me that I have ADHD instead. The world rushed around me and things clicked into place. This made way more sense to me than bipolar initially had. Inattentive symptoms and executive dysfunction did and does plague my life. My eyes opened wide, and I fully embraced this new diagnosis. I was angry with the previous providers who had misdiagnosed me with bipolar disorder. I was reluctantly grateful for being given the connection to the medication, but I was angry and felt betrayed. Stimulant medications were added to my regimen, and they helped, and I ran with it. But I couldn't let go of what that psychologist said to me in the hallway, the thing about needing to be overtly impaired in order to qualify for an autism diagnosis. I couldn't and still can't get behind the idea that because I've been able to move mountains to get where I am, that it somehow means that the mountains aren't there. I was given a list of neuroaffirming providers who offer diagnostic assessments and who identify as being adept at assessment of higher masking women. This was 2022. I hadn't really thought about pursuing a second opinion, but because I had been given this list and I had the financial privilege and access to go see a provider that I trusted more than the previous, I decided to do it. And I considered a few things because financially at that time, it was not truly a responsible decision. But I wanted to be able to tell my kids with true certainty, you're autistic just like me. I wanted to contribute to the data for the prevalence, and so I moved forward. That diagnostician told me, Aslynn, that previous psychologist didn't evaluate you for autism. She screened you out. She went on to say that I was screened out using a tool that she didn't feel was appropriate for people who present in the manner that I do. I was formally diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder as per the DSM-5 TR in the spring of 2022, just after it was published. She also confirmed the ADHD thing and the not bipolar thing. I thought, okay, this makes sense. My life finally makes sense. But I was angry all over again. There was intense grief. I had spent thousands of dollars and waited years to believe something I'd known to be true for 2 years prior, that my children and I are wired similarly, which is different than is currently considered typical. We are autistic. And this news changed my life dramatically and for the better. Understanding the ways in which having an autistic brain style impacts my life allows me to plan accordingly. It allows me to see myself in a positive light with emphasis on my strengths. I'm able to better accommodate my sensitivities when I honor them. I only fuel my anxieties by insisting that I push through them. I no longer beat myself up for the ways in which I fall short of society's expectations because I no longer subscribe to society's definition of what a happy and successful life looks like. In the wake of this new knowledge and the grieving process that comes along with it, it became clear my career would need to make another big shift. I decided to become specialty trained in the diagnosis of autistic adults like me. I read every article and book I could get my hands on. I took trainings. I was very lucky to take a training with Dr. Marilyn Montanaro, the creator of the MGDIS 2. And I verified my diagnostic process with numerous experts in the field before I began. We tried to be very mindful in setting our fees to be both sustainable but competitive in a way that I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to be a lower cost option that was not as intense an evaluation for adults who don't need full neuropsych testing. It was excessive. I shared this exciting development with a long-standing online group of friends of mine. It's this geeky moms group, and there's over 400 folks in there. And we had shared 4 years together of community, and you better believe there are a lot of neurodivergent folks in that group. And so I talked to them about this plan to improve access, and I realized very quickly in conversations with them that asserting that my self-pay services were accessible was inaccurate. Just because it was less expensive didn't mean it was achievable for people. And it made me take pause and wonder, like, but what is it really for? Like, what am I really trying to improve access to? Many of my friends were angry with me, and I realized that they were right. It was irresponsible to try to market myself as more accessible when it still costs thousands to get a formal diagnosis. I've begun to understand that the formal diagnosis is both essential for many and useless. The formal diagnosis is only required for a very small, finite list of things. Benefits, accommodations, depending on, I know that we have some international folks, but here in the US, the ADA. But if you don't need treatment or other people's accommodations or certain healthcare benefits, other insurance benefits, that diagnosis doesn't really buy you much for how much it costs. And if you've gone your whole life being told that your internal experience is different than it is, if you have been told forever that it's not too bright, it's not too loud, you're being sensitive, this is just how it is, you're going to have to get used to it, and it's like this for everyone. And often that coaching is coming from people who love you, coaching you on how to fit in, on how to push through. And we're taught to believe them instead of ourselves in many cases. I think that's why many of us seek external validation quite frequently. We're taught to believe them instead of our inner self. And so even with the mountains of incredible research coming out that suggests that self-identification of autism is overwhelmingly accurate, some of us just can't trust our evaluation of ourselves. We need an objective perspective from someone who we respect and trust and believe will know the answer. But what if you don't need ADA accommodations? And what if you don't have thousands of dollars to spend? Our system is not currently set up to provide affordable access to diagnostic services if you're not, to quote that previous psychologist, overtly impaired. Almost 25% of autistics in a study published this year reported at least one previous psychiatric diagnosis that was perceived as a misdiagnosis. Autistic women reported perceived misdiagnoses more frequently than men, almost twice as much. And what's the point of spending thousands of dollars just to believe what you already know is true? But the word autism anchors us to science, to objective evidence that our neurology and basic internal experiences can vary wildly from what is currently considered typical. You can look at the functional MRI studies that kind of like light up, and that is clear, observable, reproducible evidence that autistic brains do work differently on a fundamental level. I remember when I was a kid, I used to think like, do I see red the way everybody else sees red? And now as an adult, I know that we'll never know that. We only know what red looks like in relation to everything else. And so how could we ever really believe that there's an alternative to what we've been taught without this evidence? Some of us need to be anchored to the word autism to believe that our brain could really be wired so radically different. And so the question of what is autism is something that I'd like to think we are all unearthing right now in real time through conversations like this. For the sake of this discussion, I am going to talk about the DSM criteria and autism as a culture. I've come to find through some new communities that I've been interacting with online that there are many other ways to define, assert, evaluate for, consider whether or not you're autistic. These are the two that I'm most familiar with, and I am so excited to learn more about the alternatives. But for today, I'll be talking about the DSM. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is arguably the current core of psychiatric diagnoses. The most recent DSM version is the 5TR, and it was published in March of 2022. And within this edition, the criteria for autism spectrum disorder changed and arguably opened the door to be more inclusive of high-masking autistic individuals. But truly, and I have my desk reference coincidentally right here, it is just a book of checklists of traits, signs, symptoms, behaviors, characteristics. And if you check enough boxes, you meet criteria. But if you only light up 4 out of the 5 required criteria, does that mean you're not autistic? I support the idea that you can be autistic, regardless of whether or not you meet current diagnostic criteria by any method. If you relate with our internal and lived experiences, if you have shared sensitivities, interests, goals, values, and you feel at home in this community, if you recognize yourself among us, I think that you belong. Whether neurodivergent, ADHD, autistic, AuDHD, if you are our neurokin, then I welcome you. And I'm thrilled to see so many communities aligned with these values. We are a culture and an identity, not a disorder or an illness. When it comes to psychiatry and mental health, these checklists are things that we made up to make things make sense. This is not cancer that we can put under a microscope. This is essentially pattern recognition. And arguably, the point is to understand what's happening with someone enough to help them find relief. And so that's the end of the scripted part. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the DSM and diagnostics. And this is a conversation that I have with my clients quite a bit. in my practice. And so I had a really hard time scripting it out. And so then I just decided to stop. And so that we can all kind of have a conversation about it. So I'd like to introduce a bit of a metaphor and then open it up for conversation. And so if we think about the DSM, this list of checklists, as a star map, and the idea that on a star map, there are recognizable constellations. And I have a notebook here that's got a bunch of constellations on it. And the idea that a constellation, I think there are 88 formal constellations. And the constellation of bipolar disorder, we'll call that Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia does and does not exist. There are thousands of hours of science spent studying the stars and trying to figure out how to navigate by them. And I think that for those of us practicing clinical psychiatry, that is what we are doing. We are navigating by the stars. Thank you, academic psychiatry, for getting into the weeds and continuing to study those maps. My perspective is on this side, trying to help people find where to go. And so when we think about Cassiopeia and we think about Ursa Major and the stars in both, if you light up half of each, does that mean that you're not in that part of the sky? No, it just means that you don't fit either of those constellations fully enough to get the name Cassiopeia. And so as I was kind of exploring this metaphor, I came upon the word asterism. And asterism is essentially a collection of stars with a visible pattern that is recognizable from Earth. And they may or may not be part of a formal constellation. And so if we think about the diagnostic process as being like navigating by the stars, and we think about what can confound our ability to look at the sky. We think about weather. And so if you are in the midst of intense stress, the skies might be cloudy, it might be hard to see. If you're at a different position on the earth, the pattern might look very different to you. And so I'm an evaluator over here in this hemisphere. An evaluator over there might pick a very different constellation, but you're you and your unique constellation. And these are just things, just words to make things make sense. And I think about it almost like a light bright. I have a mini light bright on my desk that I use to try to teach. And the idea that, again, if you have half of each criteria, it doesn't mean you're neither. It just means that the medical model doesn't have a label for you to offer you treatment, accommodations. But what so many of us need is identity and community and being able to internalize the idea that brains work in as many diverse ways as we can imagine. And I think that the medical model, autism spectrum disorder, is something that will change rapidly. And I think that autistics, culture, neurodivergence is something that we get to decide together. And so I'm autistic. What about you? And I'd love to hear if people have questions about that metaphor, if people have ideas or expansions on that. How does that resonate with your experience? And it looks like we have about 10 minutes. I talked way longer than I thought I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just appreciate everybody being here, and thanks for letting me talk so long.
That was moving, powerful, perfect. Everything you said. We use the word neuroholographic here a lot. Just resonates with a lot of people, and I love that term. I wanted to circle around really quick to ask a culture question, since we're kind of a cultural group. And that is, you talk about objective diagnosis, but of course, we know it's not objective, it's culture bound. I remember the first time I got off a plane in Nairobi and watched neuronormative people trying to make their way around. It was a real aha moment. Like, and then I started looking at the DSM and thinking, they actually in different situations fulfill all of these. So if you could just say a few words about the culture clash, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so the point about objectivity is really important, and I think that the desire to be able to reflect with some sort of objectivity removes the question in our minds, and that matters more for mental health and for illness than it does for identity, because we are the only ones who can speak to our identity. And so it it no one can be objective about your subjective experience. And so what essentially is happening is somebody's describing their internal experience and their lived experience. They give it to the evaluator, and the evaluator decides what to call it. But if you don't need anything from the medical model, if it's just about who you are, I mean, it's you telling me who you are. And then I'm like, I guess you check all these boxes. Here you go. And most of my clients come to me for diagnostic services and don't need what a medical diagnosis, like what would require a medical diagnosis. And that is what began to open my eyes to the idea that this is a culture. This is a group of people who have shared values and experiences and goals, and it is important for me, for many, to be attached to the medical diagnosis to give us enough proof to believe ourselves, because it's almost pathological disbelief of our internal experience. So writes in, with the interplay of different neurodistinct diagnoses, would it not be likely that if you're lighting up significant portions of multiple constellations, that you likely belong to both, and that the interaction of the two hides the areas that might light up if you only belong to one, making it harder to get diagnosed with one or either? And that's an excellent question. And I'm going to pull out the light bright, because the idea is that we're going to pretend that this is the night sky, and our individual traits are represented. I got to hold it closer or we're going to be blurred. Our individual neurotype is expressed here. And so if stress makes one thing light up brighter than the rest of it, me on the other side of the football field as the evaluator, I might only be able to see the thing that's on fire. And so that's one consideration. Another consideration is that these diagnoses are not stamps. And so it's not like ADHD and autism get stamped on top of one another and share things. It's just you have some of either. And because these are things, these Cassiopeia, Ursa Minor, we made them up. They don't exist as tangibly as I think we would like them to. And as much as the pathology model of psychiatry would like to have us believe. And I think those labels are only as useful as the help that they provide us. And so the bipolar label, for one instance, like, I don't know if I really light up all of the bipolar diagnosis, but it doesn't matter. Like, I have the piece of what that label gave me. And so it's kind of up to each of us what constellations from an identity perspective that make sense to us. But from a psychiatry and treatment perspective, that that's a different kind of animal. Um, it's hard to diagnose in general because of that filtering of the subjective experience. It's a tiny little snapshot of folks' lives. And mental health records they don't follow you through the continuum. So you're getting one little snapshot. And it we're figuring out where those two things meet in real time now, I think. Um,
Aslynn,
yeah, I
sorry
was
to
just
interrupt. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. I mean, as a psychiatrist and fellow mental health professional, much of this deeply resonates with me. Um, but there's a lot of hands up, and I want to make sure that we get
yeah.
there. So I think the first one I see is, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was, this is not at the point of a cogent point, but more of a resonance with Aslin's story and with the concept of being, what was the term you used? Overtly impaired. And I was diagnosed, like my diagnosis was literally delayed by COVID shutdowns. Um, and, um, but I like in community and self-diagnosed before I was able to make the appointment. And I knew I needed that for me just to understand where I was going. You know, I got the ADHD and the autism and the EDS all in the same year, and suddenly my whole world made sense. But I remember something that the psychologist said, which was, you're level 1 because if you'd been level 2, you would have been diagnosed as a child. And since then, I've thought that I should have, like, and one of these days I might say it to him because we still occasionally are in contact. I was so overtly impaired in 6th grade that if I were the 12-year-old today that I was then, I would probably be diagnosed level 2. So to talk about how overtly impaired someone is once they've reached adulthood is kind of meaningless, because if we're accessing diagnosis, it means that we have worked through our most recent state of being overtly impaired, and we haven't reached our next one. But it doesn't mean that like it's irrelevant. So anyway, I don't know if what you want to do with that, but I just wanted to say I really like, you know, you were talking about all of this like dropping out of college and stuff, and I'm like, that is overt impairment. It doesn't matter what you were doing when you were 40 or 50 or whatever. The point is, you were overtly impaired when you needed to not be.
And I think that the levels speak way more to what people are willing to give you than what your actual function is.
And what type of support is available.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you can find a speech therapist to help you make words with your mouth way easier than you can find a speech therapist to help you figure out why you can't keep friends. Like, yeah.
100%.
Thank you. Do you want to go next?
Thank you. So I'm turning on my camera. I'm a little scattered, but basically I was thinking about my recent experience with auditory testing, because they didn't tell the doctor before they referred me that I was autistic, and if I wouldn't have been referred, as if I would have been referred because of autism, they would have denied me, but they went through the test anyway, and they said I tested very normal. So, like, that means that, like, now I have, like, medically, I don't have auditory processing disorder. And so, even though I experience hearing impairments in many settings that are very significant, it's like on testing, stuff just doesn't always show up. And I was diagnosed when I was 24 in 2017, because I was being tested for borderline and bipolar disorder. It was a complete surprise to me, but I spent 2 years re-self-diagnosing myself to make sure it made sense to me, because it just like didn't, it just felt like it was like very negative words for describing me, and I had to like go on this whole journey to understand it. But in the process, I learned that I had EDS, and that was a huge deal for me. It unlocked tons of supports over the course of years in self-advocacy, where I like on my like I probably would be grouped into level 1 just because I'm very verbose and I can like present myself in a certain way, but I also need significant support on like every area of life. And my ABAS score was in the 1% or 0.1%, something like that, and they didn't even test me for that when they first did it. So just a lot gets missed. And I think, yeah, I agree with you that the culture part is really important, the self-identification. In the process of understanding my diagnosis, I felt myself reprocessing a lot of trauma as well. And doctors did not listen to me about my pain until I got my autism diagnosis. I have a lot to say, so I'll move on, but thanks. But I would be interested in hearing what you think about the auditory processing piece.
I was also tested for auditory processing and got within normal limits results. But it wasn't until I understood that I had ADHD that I understood that my partner wasn't mumbling, and it was my auditory processing, even though the testing it showed normal. So I think you highlighted an important point about just because it doesn't show up on the test doesn't mean that it's not relevant to you in your life.
Thanks.
I had a lot of apologizing to do for accusing him of mumbling. Like it was it was not good. Are there other hands up? I can't tell.
Want to go next?
Hi, I'm impaired now. I didn't used to be. Comorbids. Comorbids push me towards medical model. So we need to coexist with who we are as culture and medical. Need to make safe space for older autistics who survive. So that my big thing. But my other thing is autistic and trans people understand difference. Okay, when you're trans, there's who you are as trans person and gender dysphoria. We don't go around saying I gender dysphoria. No, you say I trans, because trans is who we are. Autistic, autism, there's just one word. And that is, it's all semantics. And how DSM gets baked in the oven is old white people BS stuff, and we don't have to accept that. We have culture, we have community, and we build our own. So I just need to say that loud.
And I didn't realize that I was genderless until I found out I was autistic. I was like, oh, gender, a social construct. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm out. And it was one of the most freeing things to find out after finding out I was autistic.
Great. I did want to read what Dawn is wanting us to know here, and it's basically, I know we're scheduled until 5, but we frequently go overtime, so it really is however long is okay with you guys.
I'm good to go. I've got my Stanley full of water. However long folks want to chat, I'm good.
Thank you, Aslynn, so much for sharing your story. I also was misdiagnosed bipolar, and that was when I was 20 and living with my boyfriend at college, and had my first meltdown, full-blown meltdown in front of somebody outside of the family. He brought me to school infirmary, and I spoke with a psychiatrist there, and I described my feelings of agoraphobia, which is that, I can't go anywhere. I can't even go down to eat. I'm not showering. I couldn't do the transition of changing my clothes and all of that. So that was building up. I had other feelings of just not wanting to be here anymore. And when you tell a psychiatrist that, I'm a bit older. And I'm explaining this, of course, that goes right to suicide. I never had a plan, at that point. So once I got that diagnosis, and I ran away from it. I said, they wanted to hospitalize me. I said, I'm not interested in any of this. I'll be fine. By the time I got into my mid-20s, out on my own, and I mistakenly moved in, so sensory overwhelm constantly. I worked very high profile type jobs. I worked with media entertainment on the side, and all that stuff, of course, just building up. When I decided to go to another therapist, I think I made my huge mistake was disclosing my diagnosis. I think that by discussing that, and they do ask for rule follower, so you need to know this, I will let you that. But I think that I did myself a disservice that each time I went to a new practitioner, if I had said, I'm not sure what's wrong, nothing has really fit for me yet, I would have avoided experimental medication. So I would like to ask you, and I'm not one, I know we're already over, and I think I've shared enough, but the question that I have is, as a practitioner who does diagnose, does that make sense to maybe go in and say, may have been diagnosed in the past, but I don't want to discuss it because I'd like to start fresh because it doesn't resonate with me? Is that like something that would be good advice?
Yes. So I have worked with someone who once told me, well, if somebody tells me that they have bipolar disorder, I'm inclined to believe them. And that is an abundance of caution. One of the symptoms of bipolar disorder is a big long word, anosognosia, which means difficulty with insight about your own symptoms. And so some folks with bipolar disorder do not believe, or who demonstrate bipolar disorder episodes, do not believe that they have bipolar disorder. So providers are going to latch on to that and keep that as a red flag. If you say, I'm not really sure about my diagnostic history, I'd like to hear your impressions. I'll be fully transparent and tell you everything. And then at the end, if you want me to, however that feels good to you in that relationship. But the culture of psychiatry is very, we end up with these little snapshots of people over time. There doesn't seem to be a very long thread in outpatient. And so people should be doing a ground up evaluation every time. And you're right, by saying bipolar disorder in the beginning, they're going to grab right onto it. And if I hadn't said that I was bipolar to people, I would never have gotten the medication that I needed. Nobody would have prescribed that for me for anxiety and depression at that time.
So thank you. And that's, I did get my autism evaluation, and also ADHD, PTSD, of course, because you can with ADHD and autism without getting the PTSD. But thank you. And I think more about people who haven't gotten their evaluation, you may feel that they've been misdiagnosed, like how to handle that so that they don't write it down and say that's what we're working with and go from there.
Great. Did you want to go next?
How do you pronounce your name? Aslynn?
It's Aslynn with like a Z
Aslynn.
sound.
Aslynn. I have a lot of energy running through me right now, and this is not in any way coherent. So I'm gonna see how it comes out. But I am also a person who had a diagnosis of bipolar at age 18, and I was fine until I got sick and needed to actually, and had other things. I also found out that I have EDS, a more severe form of Ehlers-Danlos, and dysautonomia and mast cell activation, and I knew none of that, but I am, the experience that I've had is that I am a psychiatric survivor. I am somebody who had so much iatrogenic harm that I have severe PTSD, and I think as understanding part of the culture of many of us who are hyperverbal, I think it, beyond kind of the constellation of people who are AFAB, and I think this lends itself to many different types and expressions of autism. But there is I'm such a systems thinker, and I am also such a skeptic, and I have a very hard time with cognitive dissonance. And I had and still have an extremely hard time with the cognitive dissonance of how harmful psychiatry is, how dehumanizing psychiatry is, the inherent inhumanity and dehumanizing practice of allowing somebody else who is part of a capitalist, privileged academic position of power to designate what is a normative or not normative, when the experience itself of participating in that model is in itself so dehumanizing that it can cause distress in itself. And it was such the experience of having a diagnosis that devalued and invalidated the internal experience to being something of it, not only a deficit model, not being real, was one of the biggest it created disorder in almost every part of my orientation to myself and to others. It is very hard for me now I'm going into being very politically active in the madness movements and anti-psychiatry movements, because in anti-oppression liberation models, because just clinging to people who are seeing the humanity and in the diversity of mental experiences outside of pathology. I'm going back into wanting and needing to get tested for autism, and there are so many paradoxes of even how can we have this one experience of mental diversity, have such a affirming culture around it, and then we leave and pathologize our brethren and our sistren and our community members who have extreme experiences of sensitivity to be deficit models still left in the pathology realms of the DSM. I cannot still make sense of the dissonance in the system as a whole. I just wanted to say that.
I fully agree with you. And it's like I've been waking up the last couple years after being entrenched in this system. And I find myself, a word I learned recently, and I love good words, pendulate. I find myself pendulating between the medical model that is the like established framework that is antiquated, needs to go away, but that is what I was trained in, and there's a bunch of science there, arguably, and I kind of sway back and forth between what I know is the culture, what I know intrinsically is real, what we're all talking about as far as diversity and affirming, and just kind of bounce between. And I feel like conversations like this are filling in that middle and resolving that cognitive dissonance as we kind of explore together. But I use that language because that's the language I am given, but I'm not assigning pathology. I'm orienting us to where we are and trying to figure out what might help people. And I think a lot of us on the front line feel that way. But you are absolutely correct that things that are different end up, we try to medicate it, we try to treat it. I remember I was inpatient, we had this one woman who she was houseless, and she was unkempt, and her hygiene was terrible, and her self-care was poor, and she could not function out and about. She would have died in the cold. And I was still a nurse. I wasn't a floor nurse. I wasn't a nurse practitioner yet. And they were throwing every medication at her, and it was only side effects. And she would have conversations with angels and would be delighted about it and felt safe and warm and would sing. And there was nothing about her psychosis other than her poor ability to self-care and keep her safe that was averse. She wasn't trying to hurt anybody. She wasn't trying to hurt anybody else. All she wanted, she was a brilliant artist, brilliant. We had, can't have paper bags on an inpatient, or can't have plastic bags on an inpatient unit. So we had these big paper trash bags, and she would peel them out to be like a flat canvas and made these beautiful art pieces. And I'm like, why are we trying to medicate this? We need to accommodate this and hold space for this. And it's beautiful, and we need to help her and support her. But our system is miles from being able to do that. We can't. And I'm not saying that that's okay or appropriate. It's just where we are in time and space. And so the star map is all we have to help people right now. And so I'm hopeful that through conversations like this, through advocacy movements, the neurodiversity movement, that we'll start to see meaningful paradigm shift. And you can already see it happening with conversations with professionals who are coming out as self-identified and who are speaking up against the DSM. There's somebody that I'm connected with on Blue Sky that's a neuropsychologist. And she said, it makes me laugh every time people think the DSM is real. I was like, yes, it is a joke, but it's all we have to orient ourselves to help people. And the problem is that when we work in a space where we forget that, when the point is, we forget that the point is to help people. And if we lose track of that, that's when we become harmful. I've personally been responsible to make decisions that remove people's autonomy. I hate it. I had to do it. It was traumatic for literally everyone. And I know that sometimes those decisions were life-saving, but who was I to make those decisions? I woke up in that spot and I did the best I could. And there are people who said, you know, psychiatry does immense harm, immense in many pockets. And it also saves lives. And I've seen people radically transform through the traditional psychiatry treatment. These both exist. We have to hold both of these, the dialectical. And with process improvement and improved education, like, you can only hope that we're headed in the right direction from all of these angles.
Thank you. I'm
glad you're here. That's something I say often when people have been through things, especially psychiatric trauma. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad everybody's here.
I just
Well,
wanted to
that's
thank you for your sacred service, because people who live in that liminal space as ambassadors, as cultural translators, the stress is enormous. I was just writing about it today on our Facebook page. It's crushing. You cannot please everyone, and yet you love everyone. So I just wanted to say thank you for what you do. I know how stressful it is.
I feel like I've found a comfortable place. And one thing the description of this said was that I'm trying to launch a podcast. We've kind of stepped away from that because of burnout. But what I am leaning into is Blue Sky. It's kind of the new Twitter, kind of, for those of you. And I'm going to keep my head down and prescribe medications and provide the strict medical criteria diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder. And then I'm going to connect people and ideas and have conversations and resources. I've lived much of my life on social media. I'm very comfortable and happy there. And that's what I see for kind of the next chapter of my life. I've joked with a couple of people, I'm heading into my forest witch era. I'm going to hermit and nest and get really warm and comfortable and insular a little bit, and just kind of yell on the internet and try to bring people and ideas together so that we can all kind of pendulate from all these different directions and fill in the middle and figure out what we are together as a community.
it's so beautifully put. Thank you so much for that, especially addressing the psychiatric component, which is fraught with a lot of challenges and difficulties. A couple more folks with their hands up.
Do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello. So
Hello.
I think this discussion's about psychiatry, but I think looping therapy into that is also important. For context, I am AuDHD, self-identified autistic. I don't feel it necessary to pay a lot of money for someone to tell me something I already know, and I also have a large splash of PDA, and it would just make me really, really irate if someone told me otherwise. But I think, and I'm also a therapist, so I think bringing my own personal experience, when I was in therapy as a child and as a teen and as a younger adult, it was one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever had in my life. Because I'm like, oh, I can't even do therapy. I'm failing therapy. I can't even do this. So when I was told as a child I would be a terrible therapist and I should never go for that because I was too blunt, I was too direct, I didn't have any tact, and my PDA was like, oh yeah, watch me. I have thrown away all the theoretical perspective. I've thrown away all the techniques that are made for neurotypical people, and watching the relief on my patients when I don't hand them the same proverbial bullshit that they've been handed by all their former therapists has been incredible. So I think if someone is seeking mental health care, really, really, really looking for a neuro-affirming therapist, and one that's preferably neurodivergent themselves, because there's that level of understanding is really, really important, and there's not nearly enough.
And I think that you bring up a good point too about self-identification in therapy. And some studies suggest that after diagnosis and self-identification of being autistic, psychotherapy efficacy improves by a meaningful amount. And so just by believing and knowing that you're autistic, your therapy is going to be more effective because you're looking at things through the right lens. And it's funny, in the hospital, we very much worked in a dyad. So I would have a social worker with me when we would meet with clients. And sometimes, now looking back, I didn't know I was autistic then. Now looking back, with neurodivergent patients, I was essentially playing translator because I knew what the therapist was trying to communicate and I knew why they weren't getting it. I'd be like, oh, so like positive affirmations are a really great example. If you've grown up masking so hard and being inauthentic feels so yuck, and you have low self-esteem, and they're like, look in the mirror and say, I'm awesome and I'm going to have a great day. Like whatever that big flowery statement of positivity sounds like, it's going to feel uncomfortable and ingenuine, and we're not going to want to do it. And so if we are able to look at it through a very literal, concrete lens and valuing authenticity, if I'm an autistic person in with a therapist for the first time who's like, create a positive affirmation, and I'm like, I'm okay, I guess, they're going to be like, that's not very positive. Like, but that might be the most positive thing that I can say about myself with authenticity. And so it's like putting a little step in the bridge. Like I can get a little closer to positivity that way. But if you have a therapist who doesn't really understand that, you're gonna feel like you're failing therapy again. And so having someone understand that in the other side of the chair, whether through that's like cultural curiosity, formerly known as cultural competence, but the idea that the practitioner can semi-filter through an understanding, that's essential. But I mean, by and large, the most beneficial thing that I feel like I can give to my clients is the validation that what they experience in their brain is real. Because I'm like, I have that. I might not have everything that you experience, but that right there, I have that. And I might tell like a little therapeutic self-disclosure story about how it impacts me and what I do about it. And like I said, the relief, the like, I'm seeing is far more healing than the ICD-10 code, the diagnosis code that I can slap on at the end or not. Like it's about validating that our internal experience is what we know it is. We just have to believe it. And we've been trained not to. We've been trained to stuff aside our feelings and our internal experience as invalid or too sensitive or whatever. We need our therapist to believe that our brain works the way it does in order to help us make our brain work for us. Thanks. Good to see you. And I work together. Spoilers for everybody.
Great. Yeah, I just want to pivot to the chat real quick. There's a question to be read. Do you know why a mood stabilizer works better than medications for anxiety and depression? I've had a similar experience with misdiagnosis of bipolar 2, and once I got diagnosed with AuDHD, it took me off the mood stabilizer.
That's frustrating. So I am not I don't know the math of psychiatry very well. I'm out here playing jazz with my pattern recognition and understanding of medications. Folks who are more understanding of the pharmacokinetics and genetic involvement can speak to this way more precisely. My understanding is that some bipolar medications, because they work with GABA, and many autistic folks have an issue with GABA, those medications can uniquely support us for depression, as well as a little mood stability if we have some instability. But it seems to be, Roger, you might even be able to speak to this more than me, but the idea that chemically there is a fundamental difference that then our bodies are better able to leverage the mood stabilizers to move the GABA around as opposed to needing more serotonin. But one of the problems is that we talk about these medications in classifications of what they're supposed to do for us: antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics. We really need to talk about the neurotransmitter transport, because we use these meds for all sorts of different things. Psychiatry is almost all off-label. We're playing jazz with the music theory the best we can. I don't know if that answers that.
I would have to agree with that. Aslynn, it is similar to the artificial diagnostic categories. The medications, whether they're labeled as antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, those are also categories that don't restrict their use across into other indications. So really the idea is kind of what you're talking about with identification or diagnosis is, what do you do to best help the individual? So that's why a lot of times it doesn't work out as cleanly that, hey, you have this diagnosis, you get this medicine. I think people who have a lot of experience with the medications will know from their experience and from folks that they've worked with and from careful sort of interviewing and evaluation, which may be a good match for each individual.
Yep. And you're right on about the medications and the diagnoses being similarly semantics, really. And there was this gentleman that I was treating in a forensic setting who was clearly experiencing mania and psychosis. He told me, I'm not schizophrenic. I said, okay, now what? And he was like, well, what do you mean? And he wanted to argue with me that he didn't have schizophrenia. And I was like, I don't pretend to know the mysteries of the universe, but you're expressing this distress. This medication helps a lot of people with this distress. Would you like to try this medication? And the whole point is that you feel better and not worse. So you feel worse, we move on. And he was like, sold. And it turns out that one of the reasons why he didn't want to take medication is because he was vastly over medicated. He was a hyper responder. So I had him on the tiniest little dose of an antipsychotic and he cleared. And it was because I didn't argue with him about a diagnosis. And I worked with some Ivy League affiliated folks, maybe not Yale, maybe so, not Yale, who really hated that I wasn't going to confront that person about their diagnosis, and that the lack of ability to accept their diagnosis somehow meant that they had a lack of insight. They don't like your word. They don't like that identity. They also don't want to feel the way that they do. So let's talk about what would help them not feel that way.
Well,
that's what's important.
Well, here's the thing too, the Ivy League top doctors as well, they want to make money. So so any little thing that they're, that they come up with in their little research lab, they want to make the coin. So if you're telling them something that they don't want to hear that could potentially benefit the patient, it's kind of like you're starting World War III all over again with these people. And here it is, big pharma. And it ends up wrecks the whole community, because you have people that don't understand what's going on with them. I'm actually experiencing that myself. I'm potentially going on meds myself on Monday. I've been through 4 different counselors, and now a single one of them has worked out in the last 2 years after having good services pre-COVID. So, we'll see what happens now, because not only do I got to worry about, the mental side of things, I've also got physical health that, I was hospitalized last week for colitis. There's drugs that mess with the stomach when you're trying to calm down, and now you've got a never-ending battle. So, everybody just thinks it's a psych issue, but there's physical aspects to it as well that everybody just oversteps the boundary on because they have an agenda to fill.
Paternalism and capitalism are immense problems in psychiatry. I'd like to think that there are many people trying to practice in the way that I and many of my colleagues do, but I hope that the person that you meet with on Monday listens to you. I hope that you feel like you can trust them, and I hope that they listen to you next time and next time and next time, and that the whole point is that you feel better and not worse. There's like a million different ways to slice a medication regimen. Like, if it's not working for you, they can come up with something else. They might not want to, but they can. It's pretty hard to hit the absolute end of the road with treating anything. And I hope that you have access to a provider that'll listen, because
Many of us are
trying. Yeah, I know. It's worse than dating, I like to joke, trying to find a good therapist or a prescriber, because you're like, here's my whole life and all of the unflattering things about me and what I struggle with. And they're like,
I love that you said that. I love that you said that, because part of the reason I'm in counseling and dealing with this thing, kind of going through World War III with my mental health, is dating trauma. So I kind of like where you kind of knocked that one out of the ballpark with, with that expression. So thank you for that.
yeah, I've met bad therapists, I've had bad dates.
It's a 2-for-1. 2-for-1 spiral. It is.
Good luck on Monday. I hope it
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
How are you doing, Aslynn?
I'm okay. I have my water.
Are you winding down a little? We don't want to tax you.
I'm okay. I feel like I'm self-conscious about the time, but I have the time. So
yeah, we went over by an hour yesterday or day before.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
That helps.
Okay.
But no, if people want to keep talking, I'm glad you're here. That's something I say a lot. I can't tell where names are.
I see has her hand up again. Is that from before, or did you want to say something else?
Can I jump in real quick? I have a couple questions in chat. Could someone please read them to the guest? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble locating them.
Yes. Just if you want your questions read, you have to write "read" in the front. Otherwise, it's very hard to follow.
Which ones?
Read out.
I see you say, I've been trapped in autistic burnout and shut down for a year. How do I get out of it? I'm a single mom with an autistic child, and I desperately need to move forward. I'm diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm certain I'm also autistic. So Dr. Alice Nichols, and actually, let me put it in chat, www.dralice.nichols.com. I don't know her. I don't know if she knows who I am, but I talk about her all the time. She is a psychologist in the UK who specializes in autistic burnout, and her website has a ton of free resources. And I've personally benefited from a lot of that information. And so that's a good place to start. And I have a hard time speaking to this because I have a lot of privilege that's allowed me to accommodate my burnout. And I have been lucky not to face barriers such as I'm not a single mom, I have a partner. And so I don't want to diminish your struggle by speaking too specifically about it. But a neuro-affirming therapist, if you can find one in a million, but that is where I think the healing lives. It's essentially trauma healing.
I just wanted to jump in and mention that yesterday we had Carol Jean Whittington come in and talk about autistic burnout. So we'll be putting up her session soon. And also she has a lot of free resources and said that she would work with people who were, struggling financially. So just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, I was sad to miss that. It looked good. I'm looking forward to the recording.
Can I ask a question now? Okay. So I guess it's two things kind of, but one is I'm being referred to speech language pathology, but it's just like a general referral, and I told them to put hyperverbosity because I find that to be very challenging thing for me because I find myself having to think out loud very frequently in order to think at all a lot of the time, and it all really disorganizes me. But I don't know how to find people who know how to help with that kind of thing or how to communicate that need to someone who maybe wouldn't recognize that wording. And the other question is about I've dealt with a lot of medical neglect in my life, so I wasn't diagnosed till I was 24 with autism, and then a lot of diagnoses has followed. I'm applying for disabled adult child this year, and I'm really worried about finding any record of like I don't know if you have any experience with that kind of thing where somebody's trying to apply to prove they've been disabled before, like in their childhood or their early adulthood, and like how you can do that when you've dealt with so much medical neglect. Like, do you just pull can you get letters? Do you get scraps of documents? Will they be like, if it says that you're not disabled enough in this thing, even though they did this testing and had all these reasons for doing it, they're gonna say that's a reason not to? Uh, sorry, it's a big question.
No, it's okay. I wish that the experiences that people had were consistent enough for me to set an expectation. I think if it really depends on who you sit in front of, whether like what documentation they will or won't need or want. I do recommend getting as much of your medical records as you can. And then also if you find that you are verbose in the appointments, it might be helpful to either bring a script or even just a note that you can give them. I often bring in notes, but my trouble is more with receiving information. I'm able to pump my own brakes. And so bringing somebody with me is really helpful if it's a high stress one.
Sorry, I meant like when I'm like going to the speech language pathologist, what do I ask them for if I'm looking for help with being hyperverbal?
Oh, I wish I had more experience with speech therapy. Is there anybody in the group that is interdisciplinary that I would just say maybe write down like these are my challenges and these are my goals and kind of go from there.
I don't know if you heard me, but I said.
Oh, you're welcome. I think there's like a noise cancellation thing that happens.
Do we have any other last minute questions? This has been just great, great, great. I can't, I want to launch into hyperbole because this has just been a treasure trove. Anybody else for some last minute questions before we close?
I don't have questions. I guess like the other participants said, there's so much energy that I'm feeling at this moment and like want to regurgitate everything that's in my mind. But I just wanted to, I always enjoy these sessions here with Yale, and I'm so mad at myself that I signed up for different ones this week and I couldn't make it. And I'm like, oh, now I have to wait for the videos. But this was so enlightening, and I just thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's so familiar to mine. So when I find people who had such like similar experiences to mine, it's like, oh, it's this big weight off of my shoulders. You know, I'm also a musician, and so I had gone through that route as well. So that resonated for me too, and I ended up going into, I just became an LMFTA associate and trying to open my practice and trying to get into like affirming assessments because I've had such a similar journey, gaslighted my whole life about who I am and just having to suppress myself and then getting lost in that. And then now my hyper focus and my special interest is everything having to do with neurodivergency, the whole movement, and decolonizing the DSM, because it's like all of that makes sense, you know? And I feel like it makes sense for autistic brains, because I posted in the comments, I'm like, we see things for what they really are, and we can't undo that.
Yeah.
And then PDA as well, so it's like, all of that, and then the overlap with trauma, and it's just I get so obsessed with mapping all of this out. And then I love your metaphors with the constellations, and it got me so excited. I'm like, we are the best people to research our own selves. You know, our pattern recognition, and it's like we offer so much insight to our own internal experience. And that constellation metaphor was like, oh, I love that. That's another pattern I'm gonna obsess about now. I love using metaphors, and so I'm just really excited with everything you presented, and it resonates to so much, like I said, of my experience and where I'm at now, and I hope to learn more. I'm trying to figure out who to train with affirming assessments, because I feel we need more of that, and I live in an area where everything everywhere you go is ABA. It's like it's the gold standard. Everybody talks about it, and I'm here cringing like every page that I'm in for like autism community, everybody's like ABA, ABA, and I'm like trying to get in there. I want to argue with people. You know, I want to offer them my services. You know, helping families as a family therapist, but I'm like I have to tread so carefully, because especially all the autism moms are gonna jump on me. You know, and all these providers, and there's so much RBTs here, and it's really really hard living in the spot where that's valued. Universities here, the studies actually are catered to the autism studies are catered to behavior analysis, and I'm like,
I told him get that like a flag or something, like a red flag. Even I say order some numbers. I don't think it's really what it's hiding much of it.
Somebody is off mute with some background noise.
Parties being held.
Okay. Oh my God, I did it.
Okay.
Oh my God, I can't believe I did it. Wow, I actually did technology under stress. Woo!
Thank you, Tom. And I'm sorry, my screen just jumped. Who was just speaking? Was it? I missed your name.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your feedback and for mirroring that validation. I need to be seen as much as I would like people to feel seen, so thank you. I put my Blue Sky account website in the chat a couple of times. that website will bring you straight to my Blue Sky account. That is where I am yelling on the internet about neurodiversity and commenting on research studies and connecting people and ideas and resources. And so if anybody happens to be spending time on Blue Sky, I'd love to spend some time with you there.
That's great. I wanted to mention, brought up that energy, and someone else did as well earlier. We talk a lot about that now as a living cultural artifact for us. The feeling of becoming more than the sum of the parts. We become a larger living organism, a larger living dynamic brain or mind, I guess. And I love that about us. I love that about us. So I think this is probably a great place to stop. I mean, if there is a great place to stop with Aslynn, we'll just have to have you back because, oh my gosh, so much more to talk about. Yeah, so I hope you had as good a time as we did. I can't thank you enough. So happy that you were here. Thank you so much. And for those of you who want to spread the word, we always record without editing. And as soon as we anonymize those, we get them out on Roger's YouTube channel. From time to time, I actually post a link on the Facebook page to that channel. So that reminds me I should do it again soon. So yes, with that, hopefully we'll see you all very soon. Thank you. Take care out there.
About what you're saying.
Hi, everybody.
Can I ask about what you're saying? Is there more of these? Like, this is a thing that happens regularly?
Yes,
yeah, they do.
Sorry, Aslynn, if you go to Cultural Autism Studies at Yale, we have an events tab. You'll have to answer a couple questions to get in. And we have an events tab that tells everything that's coming up. And we have things all the way into spring. And we have them every year, but we don't know about summer yet. But yeah, lots of really cool stuff coming up about autistic sexuality, which is something we rarely talk about. We have a autistic musician coming to talk. We have a naturalist coming to talk about his relationship with nature and animals. That's going to be great. I have my own Casey Physics, which is a really interesting place where people discuss the holographic way of being. So go there and we'll make sure you get in. And yeah, we'll do that.
Is it possible to put a link? I can't remember what you said. Was it Autistic Cultural Studies on the Yale website?
Just remember Casey, CASY, Cultural Autism Studies at Yale. Yeah, I don't have the link handy. I'm sorry.
I grabbed
it.
Oh, you grabbed it. Thanks.
Yep, that's the Facebook link.
Perfect.
Thank you, Aslynn. Thanks so much for that. I think we lost Roger somewhere along the way.
That's all right. We made it.
Yeah, we did it. Okay. So we'll see you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.